What's up guys? Super popular question that I get. I'm going to answer today in this video, and it's whether you should use ERG mode for your workout on the trainer. So I've come up with a flow chart to answer this video. So anytime you're considering hopping on the trainer and starting a workout, you can run yourself through this flow chart and it'll tell you if you should use ERG mode depending on the workout or not. So the questions start more general. As they go further down, they get more specific to the actual workout that you're going to be completing. First question we've got, are you experienced on the trainer and planning on using it regularly? So roughly at least once per fortnight, yes or no. Why have I included this? This question is more to do with ERG mode having a learning curve. ERG mode isn't something that, it's not a natural thing to get on and just ride and have the resistance set at a specific power. There is a learning curve to ERG mode. Chris Miller did a video on it where he actually got on and when he started doing structured workouts in ERG mode, and he couldn't figure it out. He felt like, why is the resistance pounding on? It keeps grinding me to a halt. So there is a bit of a learning curve. So if you're only planning on using your trainer in wet weather once a fortnight, once a month, I'd say don't bother with ERG mode, because the hassle of getting used to how it actually works can actually be not worth the time. But if you are experienced and you do planning on using it semi-regularly, then let's move on. We'll answer yes to that. Next question, do you enjoy using ERG mode? Why have I put this in? This is probably one of the main questions, because some riders hate ERG mode. They never want to use it. So if you answer no to that, then obviously don't use ERG mode. But if you do enjoy using ERG mode, you'll answer yes, and we'll move further down the flow chart. Next question. Is a realistic road feel a high priority for you? So by this I mean regularly riding out of the saddle, easily varying your cadence, and then having that feel of the resistance more like the road. If those sorts of things in terms of mimicking a ride or a race outdoors are very important to you, I wouldn't recommend using ERG mode. Why is that? It's because in ERG mode, firstly, it's very difficult to get out of the saddle. When you're riding out of the saddle, obviously your cadence drops a little bit. So if you're in ERG mode and you stand up out of the saddle, there's a few seconds while the trainer has to increase the resistance to match the lower cadence you're putting out. Now that's not too much of an issue. The issue is when you actually, if you're doing a hard effort, when you come from standing in the saddle and you sit back down, you really have to push harder on the pedals to get on top of the resistance again, to get your cadence up and get that resistance down. So that's why if you're someone who likes to stand and sit every minute or so, which you would do on the road, ERG mode doesn't really work that well, because the ERG mode's constantly trying to get used to if you're either being seated or standing. So there's that. Cadence variations as well. Obviously on ERG mode, if you increase or decrease your cadence, which you would naturally probably do on the road, it takes a while for the resistance and the power to catch up. So it's not great for someone who likes to ride naturally with lots of cadence variations. And then the resistance feel, having that resistance chase you, which is the best way I can describe it. In ERG mode, if you're sitting on a steady power, the resistance kind of constantly chases you. As soon as you start to drop your cadence and the power drops, the resistance will load up and will catch up with you. And that's not really what it's like when you're doing an effort on the road. So if you're really trying to mimic road efforts, then you should probably turn ERG mode off. But if you don't mind either way, and you're not specifically just trying to replicate the road, then you would have answered no to this, and we can move to the next question, which is, do you have a mid to high end trainer? If yes, cool, ERG mode will work well, so you can move on. If the answer is no, and you've got more of a budget level trainer, still a smart trainer that does ERG mode, but sort of more on the entry level, I would say test the effectiveness of ERG mode on your trainer. Not all ERG modes are created equal. Some trainers in ERG mode don't feel very good and don't have a very good road feel. The inertia is quite low. And some budget and smart trainers that have ERG mode also struggle to hold your power steady in ERG mode. So I would say if you're not on a mid to high end smart trainer, just test ERG mode first before you just go and start doing all your workouts in it. Because if we go from this question, test the effectiveness, and you find trainers good in ERG mode, then you can move on. If you find your trainers a bit dodgy in ERG mode, then I'd say don't use it. Just use regular sim mode and don't worry about that hassle of constantly stressing if it's holding you in ERG mode correctly. So moving on to more of the workout specific questions. First one, is this intended to be a near maximal effort session? So not necessarily a maximal effort in terms of like a testing effort, but are these very hard efforts where you're going to be trying to hit really good numbers? If the answer to this is no, we'll follow this path. So it's not a maximal or very hard effort session. It's something more like an endurance or a tempo or even like a sub-threshold or a sweet spot sort of session. So if you answered no to that, next question would be, do you have cadence variations in your intervals then? Why did I include this? And it's because if you've got a workout that has lots of cadence variations, maybe you're going from 110 RPM down to 60 RPM and playing with that, it can be really hard for erg mode to catch up with it, because to increase your cadence in erg mode, you basically have to increase your power, push harder on the pedals so that the trainer lets go of the resistance, and then your cadence will increase. And if you're constantly having to do that throughout the workout, it's just a massive pain. It'll be much easier to do this with erg mode off and then just using your gears like you would on the road to adjust your cadence. So if it is not a near maximal session and you don't have cadence variations, then erg mode's fine to use. But if you do have those cadence variations, I'd probably say don't use erg mode and skip that. That's the end of the tree there. So really, if it's not a maximal effort session, I don't see there's only really one reason, which is the cadence variations, that you would choose not to use erg mode. Moving on then. So if it is a hard or near maximal effort session, you would have answered yes to this. And then we get to this question here. Do you have hard intervals under 40 seconds long? Let's say if you're doing 45 seconds on, 15 seconds off. It's going to be very difficult for the trainer to hold the power correctly, because there's always, as soon as you start an interval, there's always a lag in terms of the power increasing in erg mode, and then also a lag in the power decreasing. So I find under 40 seconds long, you probably shouldn't use erg mode. So if you have hard intervals below 45 seconds long, you would answer yes. So I'd say don't use erg mode. If you don't have hard intervals below 45 seconds long, you'd answer no. And then the next question would be, have you done this workout in the last month or so? The reason I'm asking this question is because when you're in erg mode, obviously it's setting you at an exact wattage. So if you haven't done a workout for a few months, maybe it's the first time you're doing a workout and it's intending to be a hard near maximal session, you don't actually know what power is right for you. Now, you might be working off like a percent of FTP, or sort of maybe you're doing it zone 5 or zone 4 or zone 5 or something, but you don't actually know if it's intended to be a hard session. You don't know, do you want to be doing 400 watts? Do you want to be doing 405? Do you want to be doing 390? Because if you're having a bad day, maybe your power will be a bit lower. If you're having a really good day and you're feeling great, you might want to bump up your power a little bit. This is a point, I asked some of the guys on Nero these questions, and this was the one Sam had. He says, if I'm feeling really good on a day, I like to push the power up. And if I'm just having a bit of a shit day, not feeling great, then he'll knock the power down a little bit. So if you've got erg mode locking you into this, it's not really great. So then in terms of this question then, if you have done this session in the last month, chances are you have a pretty good idea of the exact power targets you'll want to be hitting. So then erg mode would be appropriate. So let's say, real world example, you're doing 4x8 minute efforts, and 2 weeks ago you did the session and you did them at 320 watts average across each of them. If you do the session 2 weeks later, you might be aiming to do 325 watts across the effort. So erg mode is really good in that situation. If it's the first time you're doing this workout, or you haven't done the workout for a few months, so you're not sure exactly on the power you want to be doing, then you would answer no. So then if you answered no to that question, we would move on to the final question in the flowchart, which is, are your near maximal efforts over 8 minutes long? So let's explain this one. If your efforts are over 8 minutes long, even if you haven't done the session before, you're probably okay to use erg mode, and that's because you can use the adjuster to knock down the percentages a couple of percent. So let's say you're doing 2 30-minute efforts at sweet spot, for example. If you haven't done this workout in the last month, and it's intended to be quite a difficult session, what you can do is, let's say you're 10 minutes into your first interval and you're like, oh, this definitely feels a bit too hard. You can just knock your power down a couple of percent, and that will make the power targets more achievable. So erg mode, I think, is still good if it's over about 8 minute efforts. If the efforts are under 8 minutes long, then using those adjusters is kind of pointless, because let's say you're doing 4-minute repeats. If you get 3 minutes in, turns out the power targets were too hard and you're about to blow up, it's not much good having that adjuster there and taking like 10% off. You're going to kind of ruin your efforts. So I would say if it's under 8 minutes long and you're not sure exactly what power targets you want to be hitting, then you should be choosing not to use erg mode. So that's the overall flowchart there, guys. Explaining this in the way I just did is probably quite confusing, But if you have your own workouts and you're following this as you go along, it'll make a bit more sense because you'll just be answering yes, no, and following your way through. If you want to use this flowchart yourself, I've included a link in the description below to the image if you want to go follow it through for your next workout you're planning to do on the trainer and see what I recommend in terms of these questions. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you had a bit of fun, and I'll catch you in the next one.